We're live. I cracked myself up. Okay. If you can derive joy from one thing in this world, derive it from yourself, right? We're back. It's Poetry After Dark. It's been like 2 weeks. Crazy start of the term. Cortez is here. Cortez can attest. I have been inconsistent and terrible at all of this recently. Been busy. But I'm here now. And I'm going to read some poetry. I'm going to read some Robert Bly. I'm not going to read Robert Bly. I'm going to read Gary Snyder. We back, but we're not functioning. Yeah, I'm actually quite excited to read some Gary Snyder. Because I think he was very important in and around the beat movement. And he was certainly an inspiration to poets like Raymond Carver, who I really admire and who impacted my poetry a lot. But without any further ado, let's crack open the Coors Banquet and get into it. Yeah, that's it. All right. There was a whole beer discourse on Substack recently, wasn't there? And someone was claiming that Coors is the only beer necessary. And I strongly disagree with that. But Coors Banquet is a top 5 beer for me. I'd have to throw it up alongside Modelo. And there's like 3 local beers. I live in Oregon. There's a bunch of breweries. There's like 3 local beers that are all time for me. But Coors Banquet and Modelo, they make the list. Anyway, let's read a couple sections of this and see where we're at. Part 1. Ricardo's here. Thanks for joining, Ricardo. We're getting into some Gary Snyder. Cortez says 805 Coors Banquet and Modelo Negra. You know what? Cortez is cultured. We'll listen to what Cortez says. Yeah. We get into some adult topics here. But, you know, if you're going to be the token child of Substack TV, you've got to be willing to get into the dark and dirty conversations. Anyway, this is Elk Trails by Gary Snyder. Ancient, world-old elk paths, narrow, dusty elk paths, wide, trampled, muddy, aimless, wandering, ever-changing elk paths. I have walked you, ancient trails, along the narrow, rocky ridges, high above the mountains that make up your world. Looking down on giant trees, silent in the purple shadows of ravines. Above the spire-like alpine fir, above the high sun, steep slanting meadows, where sun-softened snowfields share the earth with flowers. I have followed narrow, twisting ridges, sharp-topped and jagged as a broken crosscut saw, across the roof of all the elk world. On one ancient wandering trail, cutting crazily over rocks and dust and snow, gently slanting through high meadows, rich with the scent of lupine, rich with the smell of elk dung, rich with the scent of short-lived, dainty alpine flowers, and from the ridge tops I have followed you, down through heather fields, through timber, downward winding to the hoof-churned shore of one tiny blue-green mountain lake, untouched by lips of men. Ancient wandering trails, cut and edged by centuries of cloven hooves, passing from one pasture to another, route and destination seeming aimless, but charted by the sharp-tempered guardian of creatures. Instinct, a god coarse-haired, steel-muscled, thin-flanked and musky, used to sleeping lonely in the snow or napping in the mountain grasses. On warm summer afternoons, high in the meadows, and their god laughs low and often at the man-made trails, precise-cut babies of the mountains, ignorant of the fine, high-soaring ridges and the slanting grassy meadows, hanging over space, trails that follow streams and valleys, and well-marked switchbacks through the trees, newcomers to the elk world. High above, the elk walk in the evening from one pasture to another, scrambling on the rock and snow, while their ancient, wandering, aimless trails and their ancient, coarse-haired, thin-flanked god laugh in silent, wind-like chuckles at a man and all his trails. Mount St. Helens, Spirit Lake. Wow, one introduction by Gary Snyder. That was incredible. Ian's joined us. Ian Catanack, everyone. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to put you guys onto a little history here. So, Washington, being Washington, well, let's go back a little bit. The National Park Service has these two parks, right? Rocky Mountain National Park and Olympic National Park. And this poem was about Mount Rainier, or Mount St. Helens, which is also National Park Zone. But Rocky Mountain National Park needed elk. So they traded Glacier National Park for the species of elk called a Roosevelt elk. And they gave Glacier in return, no, Olympic in return, a bunch of mountain goats. However, Olympic National Park was like essentially a land island during the glaciation in the Ice Age. So there was a bunch of plants there that were completely endemic to that region. And once the goats got there, they ate all of the really unique native plants. So I guess that's just a tale of man's hubris in the face of thinking you're doing something proper for conservation. And I didn't say that very well, but I think it's really poetic in a sense. And also, the idea of glaciers in the Puget Sound, top tier poetic material, because the islands there, these huge islands, like in the like Whidbey Island and the Juan de Fuca Strait, they're all left by glacial sediment. So just 50 miles of glacial sediment in the middle of the ocean, which is nuts. The forces that were at work in North America, just insane. Something to think about if you're a North American poet looking to change the game. This is what we're coming from. This is who we are. Oh my goodness. Alex Sari has joined us. Yair Jimenez has joined us. Williams joined us. Thank you, everyone. We're reading Gary Snyder. We're talking about the North American continent, the history of our geography, of our geology. And speaking of, this poem is called Out of the Soil and Rock. Out of the soil and rock, the growing season in spring, death and winter, out of the cold and rain, dust and sunshine, came the music of cities and streets, the people who take that music into themselves. Creatures of salt, carbon, nitrogen, water, may sometimes hang on the point of it. Hunger and instant, the world round the edge. This city smoke and building steel already is no more. The music and cities of the future wait beyond the edge. Interesting. Okay. Now, we're moving on to section 2. which is very close to my heart because it is on the doab of the Columbia and the Willamette, both rivers near and dear to me. Lines on a carp, old fat fish of everlasting life, in rank brown pools discarded by the river, soft round mouth nudging mud among the reeds beside the railroad track. You will not hear the human cries, but pines will grow between those ties before you turn your belly to the sun. Hmm. Interesting. So fish, um, oftentimes they'll like hide under these cut banks, and because half of them is shaded and half of them is in the sun, they'll develop these really distinct color lines. Like half of their body is dark and half of it is light from the contrast between the light and the shadow. And I guess it doesn't happen often, but it does occur. And we're getting ideas of that in this, as well as like this persistent life against the human cacophony. And it's really fascinating to compare the carp to the railroad lines because it was, of course, the Chinese immigrants who were building the railroads in the West, but they were also the ones that introduced carp to North America, especially in like Los Angeles. That's where they first were, and they raised them in pens in the Los Angeles River. And when those pens broke, the carp escaped, and they just spread from there. Of course, they were introduced elsewhere because not all rivers are connected through fresh water. But Gary Snyder really subtly merges those two themes um, and just shows this legacy of the influence of Chinese immigration that is kind of quieted in the American West. Like there's this omniscient presence of their culture, but not until somewhat recently has it really been celebrated and recognized. Um, if you start looking into like archaeological investigations in Idaho, especially, there's a lot involving Chinese immigrants that's coming up that just hasn't really been popularized. But I digress. A sinecure for P. Wallen. Wallen, curious vulture, picked the western mind, ate the cataracted eyes that once saw Guion race the hag, an adult gentleman, still unfulfilled, he skittered to the sweet bamboo, fed green on the yellow slit, and built a poem to dead Li Po. The drunkard taught him how to dance, leave dead bodies to the plants, sleep out nights in rain. This next poem for George Lee Mallory. Escaping Cambridge, he returned from London, with austere passion faced the seas, accompanied by numbered boxes, crossed the plains in teeming summer, soft eyes avoiding sores and hunger, and came to cool Darjeeling. Hundreds of sleepy Sherpas, hired at dawn to carry tea and socks to Chamaluma, here disregarding whimpered warnings, with practiced skill maintained his life in that translucent cold, and still had strength to breathe and climb, and found a hideous demon there, waiting in a golden chair with drums. This is what the simplest nomad knows. And I'm not going to comment too much, but I believe Lee Mallory was one of the first Europeans to summit Everest, or Mount Everest, or uh, Chomolungma. Spring songs. Out the building's shadow A seagull bursts, caught in slanted sunbeam, wings slanted windward, head cocked sideways, eyeing the broil of cars within the shadow. What noise, what beasts rush on those ordered paths, what ugly visions in this cubic tangle. Early spring afternoon, befuddled bird, away, sky, high wind flowing, hair wind blown back, water black mud blank. Green growing, wild things, free sowing, wind blown seed plants, curl, sprout, tissue tearing out. Message from outside. I am the one who gnawed the blanket through, peeped in the hole and saw with my left eye that one leg silver man put out the fire. I dug like mice below the cabin's floor, crawling through oil and rotted hides. I broke into that curious hand-sewn box pursued by birds. Threw my comb, my magic marbles to the wind, caught the last bus, and made it here on time. Stop chewing gum. I show you what I stole. Pine marten furs and box within each box. The final box in swallow tendons tied. Inside, and it screws into the center of your head. But there they call me Urine Boy, and this deserted newsstand is quite safe. Peer through this and watch the people spawn. It makes me laugh, but Raven only croaks. I saw Coyote, and I'll buy a gun. Go back and build a monstrous general fire. Watch the forest move into this town. You stand, cracking sunflower seeds, and stare. I like that poem a lot. Um, Mostly from a perspective of archaeological intrigue, because he's kind of comparing, well, he's envisioning this kind of like Ishmael-esque character returning from this voyage with fur traders out west and coming back to the east of America in like 1800s and telling what he saw, which is a really fascinating perspective and really clever. A change of straw. Flickering eye peers from a birdcage, shivering lips of bone, scratch and a taste of shell. Feathers cram the mouth, bird talk, loose claw carved on a stained bough. Slick eyes sleep in a dung heap, ruffle of dusty wings. Creep to the fence, crisscross chicken wire screens at the sun, crickets and plums wither dry. Caught in a barnyard with a pocketful of straw. Okay, I've got to return to my thoughts on Coors Banquet, though. Not only is it a great beer, okay, it's a great cold weather beer because it's almost session style, but it has this warmth to it and this substance to it. So, like going out and fishing when it's miserable and cold and taking this beer, great. Returning from skiing and having this beer, great. So, any like winter suffering is immediately resolved and redeemed by a 16-ounce Coors Banquet, in my humble opinion. Um, and I think my authority as a poet confirms that. Um, Under the skin of it, naturally tender, flesh and such, being entirely mortal, fragile, and complex as a model plane, demanding attention its unfair ways, getting, of course, the pleasure that it seeks. But is it pleased? Flesh being a type of clay or dust, spirit the other like a gas, rising and floating in the sun of the skull, which is to know the other's real delight, both under the skin which stretches as we grow, sagging a trifle in the pinch of time, enchanting the thought of pleasure pleasing flesh and bone. Dogs, sheep, cows, goats. Dogs, sheep, cows, goats, and sometimes deer hear loud noises, crackling in the bushes, and they flick, fly, or creep, as rabbits do, does too, into warm nests. No talk, but chatters there, small throat sounds, ear pricks, up or back, hooves, tinkle on creek beds. Who fears a talkless landscape, crowded with creatures, leaves, undergrowth, crawls all night, and summer smells deep in the bushes, crouch at the thorny stalks? Who fears a talkless landscape, crowded with creatures, leaves, falls, undergrowth, crawls all night? Hmm. One of my most memorable experiences sleeping outside was waking up. It was a full moon, and it was like 3 a.m. And I just watched this skunk walk past me on this trail I was sleeping next to, which was quite frankly terrifying. Um, I don't know if you've ever been within 8 feet of a skunk in its natural habitat as it's predating on whatever they eat in the night, but I thought it was going to be me. And I was scared. Actually, over the last summer, I think one of my boss's kids got skunked, which was funny. I was not involved in that, thankfully, but it was kind of funny. Um, Birth of the Shaman for Phil Walton. Well, there he is, 6 a.m. Rhythmic flutter of the guts. Now he's born in a drizzle of rain. Apple blossoms at Hood River. Smoke along water at river's mouth. Tide frets the pilings. Here he is, backing of the clearing. Cedar drips. Clouds are breaking. East shines through the white summit. A truck honks, crossing the logging road in the valley. He is here. I like that poem. Kind of makes me think of my grandpa, who's a logger and has been on Mount Hood countless times at dawn. Um, I'm really falling for these poems about Oregon. Okay. I don't know how to pronounce this. Athis? Atthis? Athis? Athis? Section 1. The painful accumulation of our errors. In dry summer enter loneliness, and that distracted weeping of hot, endless afternoons foretold the famine. Her swimming fondness, stretched taut in sterile time, contracted into dusty fractions, and now the crops are failing. Since my sorcery has failed, my blood must feed the soil. Let no delirious priest proclaim a second coming. These fragments will stay scattered. Her life blew through my body and away. I see it whirling now across the stony places. I lost her softly through my fingers, between my ribs. In gentle gusts she sifted free, polishing small bones. The mute, thin framework takes the winds that blow across the stony places. That was 2. 3. Starts with this quote. Still she reproached all lands, calling them ungrateful and unworthy of the gift of corn. She shall not be mollified till men go mad. The trees have died for no known reason on the heights, and cornfields withered overnight, till elk have grown with thirst, and flower buds refuse to burst, till rivers turn the fish to stone, and rocks are heard again to moan, until the sun has been retied to Machu Picchu. Men who die will be but corpses dressed in frocks, who cannot speak with birds or rocks. Part 4, Tiger Song. I gnaw the body of delight, spit the knotted gristle out, lap the blood left to lie by night. Oh, see your joy digested here, splintering to the bones of life, that torture with their fractured points, your concupiscence into strife, your love into a ball of hair, that cuts me worse than any knife. Part 4, or Part 5, sorry. Poorness and the pride we shared, our mutual viciousness natures bared, made a jungle of a bed, gnawed and comforted we fled. It should have birthed a human child. Instead, our intellects ran wild. My bitter foe, O sterile lover, stranded in my brain you are still loved there, which is nowhere. It's nowhere, and the leaves me, strangled, bound, and dangled, yet most of men free. 6. You've gone cold, I suppose, in the prosperous East, with a good job, your bright might, sorry, your bright mind turned all brain, your wild dancing feet and eyes, held still, fear finally running it all under some fancy name. The summer I hitchhiked from New York in the hottest week of August, over the desert and into sea fog, San Francisco, and took you from your mother's place. We hiked over Tamalpais, caught a ride to Tamales Bay, and camped under pines. You remember it now, and put it down, turning hard, but I know how clear and kind your love was at 18, how keen your heart and eye, how you wrote me of your downtown job, sandpipers at Stinson Beach, an old German you met on a lone hike with freckles on his back, the sunburn on your breasts. Even then, I had a terrible thought of time and age and death, of our dreamlike young love. It began too soon, was too strong, too soon, and it's gone. Part 7. Love me, love, till trees fall flat, their trunks flail down the berries, till ripe, sharp vines crawl through the door, and the air is full of sparrows. I loved you, love, in halls and homes, and through the long library. I loved you in the pine and snow. Now I love the blackberry. Ooh, brutal. Really lovely short poem. Half-known stars in the dawn sky, purple finch at the feed tray, a broom beat on a back porch, tea, my bent legs, love of you. 9. Up the Doswallops, in the ruin, in the ruins of a CCC shelter, cooking stew, rain through the broken shakes, gorge a low roar, rain and creaks. A doe in the meadow, hair plastered to streaming flanks. Hoofprints down gullies, wind whipping rain against cliffs. The trail fades to the meadow. cairns at each rise to the pass. Ash scars a ring of stone. We camped here one other summer, rain-soaked and shivering, knee-deep in squaw grass. 2 days' travel from roads. Olympic Mountains. Seaman's Ditty. I'm wondering where you are now, married or mad or free. Wherever you are likely glad, but memory troubles me. We could have had us children, we could have had a home, but you thought not, and I thought not. And in these 9 years we roam. Today I worked in the deep dark tanks and climbed out to watch the sea, gulls and salty waves pass by, and mountains of Araby. I've traveled the lonely oceans and wandered the lonely towns. I've learned a lot and lost a lot, and proved the world was round. Now, if we'd stayed together, there's much we'd never have known, but dreary books and weary hands weigh on me like a stone. Indian Ocean. He travels pretty vastly in this poem sequence. In the second section, altogether, we encounter Mount St. Helens, New York, the Olympic Mountains, um, the Indian Ocean. There's San Francisco, of course. Um, just really far-ranging poetry, all kind of converging and reuniting in this landscape of the Pacific Northwest, um, and using that imagery to inform the rest of it, kind of in a subtextual sense. I'd also like to point out that whenever elk is mentioned in this book, is capitalized. So the elk are truly important surveyors of the land, perhaps, almost compared to deities. Of course, in that introductory poem, they are directly compared to gods. Their ancient, coarse-haired, thin-flanked god. Which is kind of a unique comparison. And I wonder why he chose the elk. Perhaps just because they're the most prominent hoofed animal in the Pacific Northwest, aside from the rare moose. I don't know. Christopher is here with us now. Thanks for joining. We'll read a few more poems here. We're reading Gary Snyder. And we're on section 3, The Broad Roads of the West. Baker's Cabin on Boone's Ferry Road. Frogs all night, 3 white ducks chanting down the pond, the yowling of the Siamese in heat, and the hot iron thud on spitting shirts. Dampish firewood squeaks and burns. 4 kittens and a baby squall in boxes by the kitchen stove. Portland. These poems were written between 1952 and 1956, and that imagery is very profoundly mid-century. Excuse me. The wood stove that you're cooking on, the damp firewood squeaking and burning. I don't know if you've ever tried to make a fire with damp wood, but it's very accurate. Trying to dry out in the very fire, using it to fuel. Kind of a profound experience. Thank you for joining us, Cherries Cameron. So glad you're here. We're reading about numerous broken eggs now. Ejected from such pleasaunce, naturally, some sniveling is expected. Dalliance, in the old sense, these days rare, one is not affected. Repair to symbols, fracture of the nerve, keeping the word flected when monosyllabic pain would be the cure. Nauseous, although inspired, experience had been the guide. Freedom inflicted by one's dismissal proved to be the snare. A dangling pink-eyed rodent could learn more from such a death. Retired for meditation, one sometimes wonders on the morphine cure. In fact, the work was good. When used, the art is art, dissected. Each fragment starts anew and resurrected. 1,000 baby starfish swarm the sea, perhaps not wisdom, but a certain gain. Freedom is painless. Pleasure is not the lure. And grammar is not the goal. An insight into structure is the point. Without a method, but a sudden stare refractured into objects, each delight. A junkyard neat as nature, or a bronze, unstuck from objects, meanings are unsure. Gazing on unzoned stars, the mind takes flight. The astrolabe precisely marks each place, moving on jeweled pinions, rimmed in brass. Implicit order is the error here. What fills the sky is keening of swift wings, all things seen by the naked eye when closed. It's a fun poem, worth revisiting. Numerous Broken Eggs by Gary Snyder. And this poem is The Lookouts. Perched on their bare and windy peaks, they twitter like birds across the fractured hills, equipped by science with the keenest tool, a complex two-way radio full of tubes. And most alone and highest in the land, we trust their scrupulous vision to a man, assume their eyes are slitted to the sun, search each gorge and ridge slope for a sign. They are the ones to fix a point in sight, reveal the azimuth of a distant flame, define the range and township of its light, and send us trampling blindly to the scene. What we perceive on maps in scale is theirs, enormous and sprawling, falling on every side, off to a rough horizon scoured by ice, poking through clouds and snowbound half the year. Should we envy how they peer above, over our rainy valleys, peak to peak, sending triumphant warnings out of space that blare and startle on the speaker box? We need not listen. With a toggle switch, all that they say is stopped. Our time is ours. Or if that complex radio should break down, taught how to use, but not to fix, its tubes. For all their artful watching, they are dumb. Totally useless, lost to human speech. They mutely have to make the long hike down. Wow. One interesting contemplation on the nature of being a fire lookout and the treachery of radios breaking, which isn't something we can really comprehend in this day and age. Like, just replace the batteries. Um, but I guess what time for a poet that must have been when the technology of the computer was just brimming and it was a series of vacuum tubes. And that was all they used to transmit this electricity. Huh. And now we're here, where the mere contemplation of it just kind of drives me insane. I'm gonna read one more from the Upper Skagit country, where I was born. History must have a start. Took all day to find it. Mine cabin on Canyon Creek, looking for good tools worn old brass safety razor with teeth, grown over with berries in a rubble of palings. Door frame broke, roof sagged in, logs all skewed, about ready to fall. Wheelbarrow gears, a pick rusted by the door. Inside, chairs broken, the mouse-proof. Chest filled with dry pellets and the shredded remains of a blanket. Rusty crosscuts hung from the rafters. Less than 20 years since the claim was abandoned. But isolated, mice have moved in. Plants poked through the puncheon. Tools of our time, nothing for an archaeologist, unless washboards are rare. The whole works packed in on a muleback, in pieces, and never enough gold to pay. No ceramics or statues, like Harappa or Knossos. These are from civilized times. And I will leave us to contemplate that. Thank you.